Tonight, we are opening 9 documented case files that share one impossible pattern. A small town's systems behaved as if they were answering to a caller no one could see. These accounts were compiled from dispatcher logs, municipal maintenance records, harbor light telemetry, archival map collections, surveillance footage, metadata, and first-hand statements recorded immediately after the events. If you want more cases like these from the edges of mapped territory, subscribe to Black Pine Archives and turn on notifications. And after the 9th file, leave a comment with which detail felt the most wrong, because these stories do not end when the recording stops. Begin. Mara Elwood had lived in a mill town long enough to interpret sound the way other people interpreted weather. A train horn meant a delayed crossing. A power line pop meant a storm that would matter before dawn. And the firehouse siren, the old mechanical kind that rose in pitch and then held, was supposed to mean one thing: a real call, a real page, a real reason to move. The first time it happened, Mara woke with her heart already running ahead of her thoughts. The 3-tone alert hit the valley in clean steps. Then the siren climbed into its long, sustained scream. She waited for the rest of the sequence, the garage doors lifting, the diesel engines coughing awake, the brief bark of radios as volunteers confirmed they were on the way. Nothing followed. The street outside remained dark. No headlights moved through curtains. No boots hit porch boards. The sound carried for several minutes, then ended like someone had released a button. The quiet afterward felt too organized, the kind of quiet that arrived after a decision. By morning, the town moved, as if it had collectively dreamed the same dream. People compared wake-up times at the post office and the diner. Nobody could agree on how long it lasted. Everyone agreed on the hour because the hour never changed. It went off right on schedule, like a drill, except nobody moved. From a resident statement, the fire chief blamed an electrical glitch. The siren was old. The panel was older. The town's funding had been thin since the mill layoffs. He promised to have it checked, and for a day the town accepted that as a reasonable explanation. Then it happened again. Same hour, same 3 tones, same long scream, same absence of trucks on the road. By the 3rd night, Mara started noticing the way the siren's pitch wavered at the same point every time, a faint tremor at the peak. Mechanical flaws repeated. Humans did not repeat that cleanly unless they meant to. She began recording it from her bedroom window. Her phone captured the obvious noise, but it also captured a faint underlayer that she could not hear as clearly in real time. A soft relay click pattern beneath the siren, regular and patient, like a smaller signal riding underneath the bigger one. It sounded like a switch being tapped under the siren, like something was timing it. From Mara's audio note. The first person to check the official record was not a resident. It was a part-time dispatcher named Elena Sato, who worked overnights at the municipal desk that handled fire, public works, and overflow calls when the county line was busy. Elena did not trust stories until they became documentation. She trusted timestamps, system exports, and the paper journal the town still used as a backup, because the internet service was unreliable. After the first event, she pulled the dispatch journal and found nothing. No structure fire, no brush fire, no medical assist, no training drill entry, no line that explained why a siren would be activated. After the second event, she checked while the siren still echoed off the ridge. She watched the clock on her console and waited for the inevitable incident number to appear. It did not. There were no incident entries, the siren time aligned to an empty line in the log. From the dispatcher journal review, Elena requested the automatic call history from the paging console, the piece of equipment that normally logged outgoing pages and station alerts. The console showed an activation at the exact minute the siren sounded, as if a page had been sent from the desk, but the message field was blank, not corrupted, not missing. Blank in a way that suggested the system had initiated something without being told what it was. The console registered an activation with no message content. From the equipment export, Elena searched for common explanations: a stuck test mode, a miswired input, a short across the trigger line. She compared nights. The activation always appeared at the same minute, like an appointment. The console's internal clock stayed accurate. The event's timestamp matched the wall clock perfectly, except for a single anomaly. The console recorded the start time as 1 minute earlier than the desk log every night after the fourth event. Elena made a note of it, the kind she normally did not bother writing down because most discrepancies were human error. 1 minute discrepancy observed between system time and event time. From Elena's incident scratch notes. On the fifth night, Elena stood outside the station after her shift ended, wanting to hear it without walls between her and the sound. The siren came on, and she felt the vibration in her chest. She watched the bay doors. They stayed shut. She watched the dispatch windows. They stayed dark. The building looked asleep while its voice screamed. Then the smell changed. It was subtle, but Elena noticed because dispatchers memorized sensory cues the way medics memorized symptoms. A faint hot metal scent drifted from the siren housing, as if it had been running too long or being driven too hard. It reminded her of overheated wiring insulation. It smelled like hot electrical paint, like a motor working under load. From Elena's personal statement. The next morning, the fire chief swore the siren panel showed no manual activation. The lockout switch was engaged. The key was in his desk. He could not explain why the console export said otherwise. A county technician arrived later that week with a tool bag and a skeptical tone. He inspected the relay cabinet, checked the wiring, and tested the manual trigger. Everything behaved normally under his hands. The system responded to direct input like a system should, and yet the nightly activation remained. The technician recommended replacing the control board. He wrote the suggestion as if it were routine maintenance, but his last line was unusually careful. No fault replicated during daylight testing. Event appears time-specific. From the technician's service note. By the seventh night, the town had begun treating the siren as a curfew. Porch lights went out early. Curtains stayed closed. People checked on older neighbors before the hour, as if preparing for weather. Families set radios louder at bedtime, not for information, but for company. Children learned to fall asleep through it and still flinched when it ended. Mara began to notice that the siren did not just start at the same hour. It ended at the same minute, as if the system had a timer rather than a human hand. The final fade always dropped in the same two-step pattern. A brief sag, then a clean stop. Like someone releasing a button, like a circuit opening. On the seventh night, Elena stayed at the desk with her headset on and her hands away from the keyboard. She wanted proof that would make the case boring again. The siren began outside on schedule. The console screen flashed an incoming call banner that did not include a number. The caller ID field populated with a single dash, then cleared itself. The line never rang. It simply appeared as if it had already been answered, like a phantom call that skipped the part where a human was invited to consent. Elena opened an incident stub on Instinct. The cursor blinked in the narrative field, then it moved, not far, just enough to place a timestamp in the text box, as if someone were documenting the event for her. The timestamp was wrong by exactly 1 minute. It was the same 1 minute offset she had already been tracking in the console export. Elena froze because dispatchers were trained to recognize when a system stopped being a tool and started behaving like a participant. It felt like the computer was finishing a sentence I did not start. From Elena's follow-up memo, she printed the screen and logged it. She checked the security camera footage afterward. The footage showed Elena alone at the desk, hands still. No one touched the keyboard. No one entered the room. The town council asked for a county review. The county said it was a local issue unless there was a verified emergency call. The fire chief pushed for a software update, a panel replacement, a full rewiring. Each fix would take time, money, and contractors who were booked months out. The siren did not wait. Night after night, it sounded anyway, always with the same three-tone alert, always at the same time, always without a matching call, always leaving a town awake with no fire to fight and no paperwork to justify the fear. Mara eventually stopped recording it because she began to dread what she might catch if she listened closely enough. She slept with earplugs and still woke to the vibration in the bones behind her teeth. On the 11th night, she noticed something that made the pattern feel less like malfunction and more like intention. The siren began, and for a brief moment the sound seemed to face her house, louder than it should have been at that distance, as if the horn had turned its throat toward her street. Then it leveled out again, spreading across the valley like normal. I know it sounds impossible, but it felt aimed for a second. From Mara's statement, no one in town could prove that. No one could prove the opposite either. All they had was the empty dispatch journal, the console export with blank message fields, the 1-minute drift that behaved like a signature, and the fact that something could trigger the town's voice without leaving a trace of being the one who spoke. Archival transition. The next file began at the waterline, where lost things usually drifted in. This one arrived bundled, tagged, and ready to be claimed. The pier at Blue Hollow Reservoir was not a tourist postcard. It was a working edge, built for fishermen and maintenance crews, where the boards stayed damp even on clear days, and the air carried algae, gasoline, and old rope. People dropped things there all the time. Hooks, bait knives, cheap flashlights. Those items appeared the way accidents appeared. Messy, half-hidden, kicked under planks. This item was different. Derek Hahn, the harbor attendant, made his rounds before sunrise because the reservoir behaved better when someone watched it early. He checked the fuel shed, the trash bins, and the posted hours sign that people ignored. When he reached the far end of the pier, he saw a small canvas bag sitting beside a cleat like it had been set down gently, not dropped. The cord was tied in a simple knot. Not hurried, not tangled. The bag sat upright, weight balanced, as if someone cared whether it fell into the water. Derek hesitated before touching it. The pier was quiet enough that he could hear water moving under the boards, and that made the stillness above feel intentional. He lifted the bag and felt the solid thump of metal inside. Keys, dozens of them. Each key was clipped to the same kind of plastic tag, the kind motels used because it was cheap and hard to lose. The tags all bore the same faded logo and the same property name, Lakeside Pines Motel. The motel had been closed for years. The owner had died without family to inherit it. A county inspector had condemned the property after winter pipes burst and mold spread through the walls. The place was supposed to be empty, unstaffed, and legally unusable. The room numbers on the tags varied in a way that made Derek's throat tighten. Low numbers, high numbers, even numbers, odd numbers. It looked like a full front desk set, the kind you only saw when rooms were meant to be occupied. All keys bore identical property branding with differing room identifiers. From the property intake sheet, Derek carried the bag back along the pier as if it might change weight if he swung it too hard. By the time he reached the parking lot, he could not shake the feeling that he had been allowed to find it, like a staged discovery. He brought it to the sheriff's office instead of the marina office because there was no normal lost and found process for something that looked like evidence. The deputy on duty cataloged the tags, photographed them, and checked the motel's listed contact number out of habit. The number returned a disconnected tone. County records confirmed what the town already knew. closed status, condemned status, no personnel on file, no active business license. The keys themselves refused to look old. The metal was bright, the teeth were crisp. The tags were clean enough to suggest they had not been sitting in mud or water for long. Derek's first written statement included a detail he kept repeating whenever anyone asked him to be rational about it. They felt warm, like they had been in a pocket. From Derek Hand's written statement, the sheriff's office assumed trespassers, teenagers, drifters, people with a taste for urban exploration and no respect for signage. The reservoir was a short drive from the motel, and the pier was a natural place for someone to dump something they did not want connected to them. A deputy drove out to Lakeside Pines before the morning shift ended. The parking lot was empty. The office door was chained. The lobby windows were filmed with dust thick enough to soften the edges of everything inside. The neon sign by the road was dark. The power meter showed no active service. The gravel at the entrance held no fresh tire tracks. For an abandoned place, it looked properly abandoned. And then, at the edge of the office porch, the deputy noticed something that did not belong. Water droplets on the concrete step. They were not old stains. They were fresh beads, round and shining, like they had fallen recently from something wet. There had been no rain that night. The air had been cold and clear. No sprinkler systems existed on the property. The droplets looked like a short trail that began under the office window and ended at the chained door. Moisture droplets observed on concrete despite no precipitation. From the deputy field note near the pool gate, the latch carried a smear of wetness, as if a hand had gripped it and then released. The smear was too clean to be grime, too localized to be dew. It read like contact. The deputy did not enter the motel. The chain on the office door was intact, and the county did not want liability. He walked the perimeter, photographed the droplets, and returned to town with the kind of report that looked ordinary on the page, but felt wrong in the mouth. The keys were placed in evidence and treated like property. Then someone suggested a test. A locksmith named Hollis Crane agreed to meet the deputy at the motel during daylight. Hollis had worked on older doors and knew the difference between a key that had been cut yesterday and one that had been filed down by years of use. He brought basic tools and a cautious attitude, assuming the keys would be mismatched junk that did nothing. They started with a room on the first row because it was easiest to reach without walking deep into the property. The key turned. The cylinder engaged cleanly, without grind or hesitation. The latch clicked back like it had done the same motion recently. Hollis tried another key for a different room. It worked too. Key and lock interfaces showed minimal wear consistent with recent use. From the locksmith assessment, the deputy did not open the doors wide. He cracked them enough to confirm engagement and then shut them again. He did not want to create a story the department could not control. Still, the implication was already there. Keys were not just objects. Keys were promises. They implied rooms that belonged to a system. Someone checked in, someone checked out, someone kept order. Lakeside Pines was supposed to have no system. It was supposed to be dead on paper and dead in practice. The evidence suggested the opposite. The hardware behaved like it had not accepted the closure. A week after the keys were found, Derek returned to the pier before dawn and found the boards damp in the same familiar way. But the air carried a faint smell he did not associate with the reservoir, stale carpet and cleanser. He told himself it was imagination. He told himself smells traveled in strange ways over water. He still wrote it down. It smelled like a hallway that had been shut too long, like old cleaner and wet fabric. From Derek's supplemental note over the next several weeks, locals began reporting the same detail in slightly different language. The motel sign glowed during fog. Not the full neon brightness of an active business, but a weak, sickly flicker that made the letters readable from the road when the mist was thick. People would notice it on a late drive and feel a brief relief, like seeing a landmark in bad weather. Then they would look again and realize the motel had no power. By morning, the sign was dead. The building looked shuttered. The road shoulder showed no cars. One can see the sign glow in the mist, then nothing in the morning. From a neighbor's statement, the sheriff's office treated these reports as rumor until a deputy's dash camera captured a faint, greenish pulse in the fog one night, far off the highway shoulder. The footage was too distant to be proof, but it was enough to make the department stop laughing about it. When they reviewed the file, they also noticed something in the evidence photos from the pier: the canvas bag's knot. It was tied in a style used for securing linens on supply carts, a flat knot that sat tight and did not slip. It was not a fisherman's casual tie. It was not a child's half knot. It looked like someone who tied things all day had done it without thinking. The keys remained sealed in evidence, tagged and inventoried, because that was what the system knew how to do with objects. But the town began to sense a shift in what authority meant. The paper said the motel was closed. The records said there was no staff. The logs said nothing happened there, and yet the locks still accepted the keys as if they were waiting for guests who had never officially arrived. Archival transition. The third file came from a building that had been silent for decades. It did not need power to remember how to move. Ridgway Sawmill had been abandoned long enough that the town no longer remembered it as a workplace. It was a landmark for warnings, a silhouette of corrugated metal and warped beams squatting beside the river cut. Children learned the rule before they learned the geography. Do not go inside, because the floors were soft, the nails were exposed, and the building did not forgive weight. Nolan Pierce remembered it from the passenger seat of his mother's car, passing it on the way to school. He remembered the smell when the wind blew from the river, old sap and rust and wet lumber that no longer existed. By the time he became an adult, the mill had become background, the kind of dead place people stopped looking at. That was why the first report sounded like somebody hearing what they wanted to hear. A night fisherman called the non-emergency line just after the fog rolled in, saying there was machinery running near the mill. He described a grinding rumble beneath the river sound, a slow mechanical rhythm that did not match wind, water, or the distant road. The sound resembled an active conveyor drive. From the call intake summary, the dispatcher asked practical questions and received practical answers. The caller could not see through the fog, but he could hear the pattern, and he recognized it because he had once worked industrial jobs. He stayed on the line long enough to sound embarrassed, then ended the call as if he had said something foolish. Deputy Callum Reyes responded anyway, because boredom and habit often did more good than skepticism. He drove out with the assumption he would find teenagers with a generator, or trespassers trying to strip copper, or someone who had cut the chain and decided the mill was a private clubhouse. The gate was still chained. Fog pressed against the fence like damp insulation. Callum's headlights cut a narrow tunnel through it, and everything beyond the beam looked swallowed. The mill's outline appeared and disappeared, depending on whether the fog thickened or thinned. He parked on the shoulder, turned on his body camera, and listened before he stepped out. He heard it immediately, a low clatter that did not belong to water, a repeating metallic whisper like chain links rolling over rollers. It came in steady pulses, patient and consistent, the way factory machinery sounded when it had been running long enough to find its balance. Callum followed the fence line until he found a break where the mesh had been peeled back months earlier. He stepped into the yard and felt the ground change under his boots, the concrete slick with condensation. The fog inside the property seemed heavier, less affected by his movement, as if the yard held it the way a sealed room held smoke. As he approached the main building, the sound resolved into detail. The conveyor belt was moving. It was not jerking like a belt being forced. It was not scraping as if it were dying. It moved the way it would have when the mill was alive, rolling smooth over worn rollers, the chain drive clicking with a lubricated cadence that should not have existed after decades of neglect. The conveyor appeared to be in continuous motion with no visible power source. From the deputy report, Callum aimed his flashlight through a gap in the siding and saw the belt in motion, its black surface slick with moisture. No boards rode on it, no debris shifted. It ran empty like a demonstration. The air smelled wrong for an abandoned building, not just mildew and rot. There was a sharp edge of machine oil, fresh enough to register as alive. He swept his light across the floor and found boot prints on the concrete, wet impressions that shone at the edges as if they had been laid down minutes earlier. The tread was deep and industrial, the kind worn by workers who spent their lives on hard floors. The prints did not lead from the breach in the fence. They did not run from the gate. They existed in a cluster near the conveyor's intake, then continued in a straight line toward the darker interior, as if the person who made them had stepped down into that spot from nowhere and begun walking. They were fresh. The wet had not even started to dull. From Callum Reyes's supplemental statement, near the base of the conveyor, droplets of oil formed a dotted trail across the concrete, too neat to be random spill. The droplets were dark, thick, and reflective. They looked like they had fallen from a moving part that had recently been fed. Fresh oil droplets observed despite documented power disconnect. From the facility's cross-check memo, Callum checked his radio out of habit, thumb pressing the transmit button as if routine could anchor the moment. The radio crackled and delivered not voice, not static, but a thin repeating tone that sounded uncomfortably structured. It hit in 3 steps, a short tone, a second tone, a third tone, then nothing. Callum did not connect it in that instant, not consciously, but his body reacted the way it did to a siren, shoulders tightening, breath shortening, attention snapping forward. He stepped farther into the building, keeping one hand on the doorframe because the floorboards beyond the concrete pad looked soft and dark. The fog inside the mill behaved differently than outdoor fog. It did not drift in currents. It held low, dense, and layered, as if the building were containing it. The conveyor's rhythm continued. Then deeper in the mill, where his flashlight beams stopped reaching, something shifted. Not a voice, not a clear footstep. A heavy settling sound, like weight transferring onto a surface. Then a faint, wet squeak, the sound of footwear turning on damp concrete. There was movement deeper than the light reached. From Callum Reyes's supplemental statement, Callum backed out one step, then another, letting the doorway frame him again. He told himself it was a raccoon or a deer that had wandered in. He told himself it was his imagination filling in gaps, because fog did that to perception. The conveyor belt speed changed. It did not accelerate wildly, it tightened, smoothing into a more efficient cadence, as if it had found its proper operating rate. The sound became cleaner, less hesitant, like a machine that had been waiting for someone to notice it. Callum stopped pretending he had control over the situation. He turned away from the doorway and keyed his radio for backup, speaking into the mic with a calmness he did not feel. His transmission went out. Then, in his own earpiece, it returned a beat later as an echo, slightly altered, as if the mill had repeated his words back into the channel without carrying their meaning. Radio traffic returned with delayed repetition. From communications notes, he did not go back inside. He held position near the fence breach and kept his light trained on the doorway, watching the fog shift in small, slow folds. He watched the conveyor continue to run in the background like a heartbeat. When the second unit arrived, the yard changed. The fog began to thin, but not like weather clearing. It drew back in a gentle pull, as if being gathered from the ground and lifted away. The conveyor slowed, rollers losing momentum with deliberate grace, and then stopped. Silence returned. Not perfect silence, normal silence. River sound, a distant vehicle, the small hiss of wind through weeds. The building was dead again, the way it was supposed to be. In daylight, a county facilities worker confirmed what the documents already said. Power service had been disconnected years earlier, meters sealed, lines cut and locked. No generator had been hooked up. No fuel smell lingered in the yard. No new tire tracks approached the gate. The only proof that anything had happened remained on the concrete, the boot prints, the oil droplets, and a smear on the conveyor housing where condensation had been disturbed by something warm enough to leave a partial handprint in damp grime. Condensation disturbance consistent with recent contact. From the scene documentation, a separate piece of evidence came from a warehouse security camera down the road, one that captured the mill entrance and the stretch of highway beyond. The footage showed fog rolling in, headlights passing, and then a strange occlusion over the sawmill property only. The image did not fail across the whole frame. It darkened in a clean rectangle that matched the mill yard, as if the camera's ability to see had been reduced only where the mill sat. No image loss observed outside the mill boundary. Occlusion appeared localized. From the video review note, the case file did not prove who or what started the conveyor. It did not prove motive. It could only document the pattern. Fog arrived, machinery ran, prints appeared, oil freshened, and the mill behaved like it remembered its purpose. After that night, Ridgway stopped treating fog as simple weather. People began to slow down when it pooled low in the streets. They avoided the mill road when mist sat heavy by the river cut. And the older locals, the ones who still remembered the mill alive, started saying something they had not said in years. Not that the mill was haunted, that the mill was working. Archival transition. The next file did not come from a machine or a locked door. It came from a sign that changed its message after rain, as if the town's welcome could be rewritten overnight. The town's entry sign stood where the highway dipped and the trees briefly opened. A wide painted board mounted on 2 posts with rows of removable black letters. It was maintained by a volunteer committee and updated for holidays, fundraisers, and high school sports. Everyone knew its quirks. Uneven spacing, missing vowels, letters flipped backward when someone was in a hurry. That history was what made the first precise change feel wrong. Britt Keller noticed it because she drove past the sign at the same hours every day, opening her small grocery before sunrise and closing it after dark. She had a mental record of what the sign was supposed to say because it was part of her routine, as familiar as the curve in the road and the first telephone pole after the tree line. After a heavy overnight storm in early autumn, she saw the letters were different. The word welcome remained on the top row, but the second line no longer carried the committee's cheerful message. The letters were spaced with careful symmetry, as if aligned by a measuring tape. The phrase read like an instruction, not a greeting, and the tone felt aimed at the person reading it rather than the town announcing itself. The sign still said welcome, but the rest looked like an order. From Britt Keller's statement. Britt pulled into her grocery lot with her stomach tight and glanced up the road to see if anyone else had noticed. A truck slowed near the sign, its brake lights glowing in the damp fog. The driver stared long enough to make the pause feel deliberate, then accelerated and disappeared around the bend. At the store, Britt replayed the obvious explanations. Teenagers, drunk vandals, a prank. But the thing about removable letters was that pranks usually looked like pranks. They were messy, they were jokey, they were careless. This was neither. The volunteer committee met that afternoon and insisted no one had touched the sign. They accounted for every person who held a key to the letter storage box behind the community center. They checked social posts and group messages. No one bragged. No one admitted. When the sheriff's deputy arrived, the rain had stopped, but the shoulder was still wet enough to hold an honest story. The deputy walked the ditch line and shined a flashlight under the sign's posts, expecting footprints, tire ruts, or disturbed gravel. The ground beneath the sign looked brushed, smooth, not naturally smoothed by rain, not flattened by water runoff. It had the subtle streaks of a wide object dragged across the shoulder in overlapping strokes, like someone had erased impressions while the soil was soft. Ground surface appeared deliberately smoothed beneath sign, from the responding deputy's note. The deputy examined the sign itself. The letter tracks were clean. The plastic letters were not cracked or warped. There were no fresh scrape marks that suggested hurried hands. The message appeared assembled with patience. The committee corrected it in daylight. They removed the instruction-like phrase and reinstalled the original greeting. They photographed the finished sign from multiple angles, and to eliminate arguments later, they marked the back of each letter with a small paint dot, the kind of tiny proof you used when you expected to be doubted. They also did something else. They counted. They recorded exactly how many of each letter the town owned, because towns lost letters over time, and missing letters could be blamed for any message that looked strange. If the sign changed again, they wanted to know whether it had used the same pieces or whether someone had swapped in new ones. That night, rain returned. It was not dramatic at first, just steady water tapping the roof of Britt's store and running in thin threads down the windows. She woke once and listened to the sound of it, half alert for the firehouse siren that had begun to define the town's nights. When the siren did not come, she still could not settle. Something about the rain felt like a condition, like a switch being turned. In the morning, the sign had changed again. Welcome remained. The lower line had been rearranged into a different phrase, and the spacing was still perfect. The message was new, but it carried the same tone. Not announcement, not humor, but direction. The paint dots were still on the backs of the letters. The same physical pieces had been used. They had simply been rearranged. The same letters were present, but their order had changed. From the maintenance committee log, the committee argued in the parking lot near the sign, accusing each other with the exhausted anger of people who wanted the problem to be human. They pulled the letters out and checked the paint dots themselves, hands wet from rain, breath visible in the cool air. Nobody could explain how the sign changed without someone touching it, and nobody could explain why the change always arrived with rain. A trail camera was mounted discreetly in a tree line across the road, angled at the sign. The county supplied it because the situation was drifting into the kind of story that made officials uncomfortable. Not dangerous enough to justify large resources, but persistent enough to turn into rumor. The camera recorded the next storm. The frames remained normal until the rainfall intensified. The moment the rain thickened into a sheet and the world became reflective and blurred. For a span of time, the sign stayed visible, but everything around it turned into an indistinct smear, as if the sensor could not resolve the air between the lens and the sign. The road became a glossy stripe. The trees became shadowy columns. The camera's timestamp remained stable and unbroken. When the image returned to clarity, the letters had changed. Sign content differed after a period of image degradation during rainfall. From the camera report, the footage did not show hands. It did not show a vehicle pulling over. It did not show a figure stepping into frame. It showed rain, distortion, and then a completed message. Britt began to dread storms the way people dreaded sirens, not because of superstition, but because patterns created consequences. Rain meant the sign would change, and the new phrase always felt too relevant to the town's growing list of anomalies. It echoed themes that locals had started whispering about at gas pumps and in grocery aisles. Words about staying inside. Words about routes that did not exist. Words about listening, waiting, and not following sound. It did not feel random. It felt like it knew what the town had been talking about. From a resident voice memo, the sheriff tried to end the story by removing the letters entirely. The board was left blank, scrubbed clean, with no message to rearrange. The letterbox was sealed and stored inside the municipal building. The committee promised they would replace the sign with a printed banner until the situation blew over. Rain fell again. By morning, the blank board showed fresh drip trails running down the paint in thin streams that had dried in shapes resembling characters. The streaks did not form a full sentence, but they repeated certain angles, certain curves, enough to make people argue about what they resembled, enough to make Britt look at the sign and feel the same instinct she felt during the siren, the sense of being addressed. A county worker photographed the board and attempted to wipe it clean. The streaks lifted, but faint ghost lines remained in the paint, like the wood had held the shape briefly and then let it go. Water streak patterns appeared unusually structured, residual ghosting noted after cleaning. From the maintenance incident note, after that, people stopped calling it the welcome sign. They called it the board. They avoided looking at it during rain, the way you avoided looking at something you feared might look back. Drivers kept their eyes on the road as they passed. Parents told children to stop reading the town entrance out loud. Britt began closing her curtains on storm nights, not because she believed the sign could harm her, but because she had learned, in a small-town way, that attention could be a kind of invitation, and the sign's behavior created a new rule the town followed without officially agreeing to it. When rain fell, nobody wanted to be the first person to see what the town now welcomed. Archival transition. The fifth file came from the waterline, where lights were meant to guide people safely home. That night, the code did the opposite. Blue Hollow Reservoir operated a small ferry for maintenance crews, seasonal contractors, and the occasional vehicle that needed to avoid the long road around the waterline. It was not a tourist ride. It was a routine, measured in checklists and mooring lines with paperwork that assumed fog was the only variable worth fearing. The harbor light on the point was part of that routine. It was an old unit modernized quietly over the years. LED head automated timer, a controller that reported its own health back to the county system. It flashed a simple, familiar pattern that every operator on the lake could recite without thinking. The code was meant to reassure. It told the pilot where the point was, how the shoreline bent, and where the safe corridor stayed when visibility thinned. On a late autumn night, the lake carried a low ceiling of mist that should have stayed shallow and patchy, the kind that made lights bloom but did not erase land. The ferry left the dock on schedule, its running lights bright against black water, its engine tone steady and unhurried. The captain, Jory Vance, had run that route long enough to notice when anything changed by a fraction. He noticed the harbor light first. The pattern did not fail outright. It did something subtler. The light began correctly, then drifted. The pause between flashes shortened, then stretched, then held for a beat too long, as if someone had lost count and corrected late. It did not look like a mechanical glitch. It looked paced. The intervals were wrong, like the light was being hand-timed and someone kept missing the beat. From the captain's recorded incident note, the dock supervisor, Nia Landis, watched from the dispatch window with a clipboard in hand, marking departure time and weather notes the way she always did. She saw the light's rhythm stutter and felt a small tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with storms. A navigation aid was supposed to be boring. When it stopped being boring, it meant the lake was about to stop behaving like a lake. Nia checked the monitoring panel that displayed the harbor light's status. The panel reported normal operation, No faults, no voltage drops, no timer drift. The system insisted the light was doing exactly what it was designed to do. Unit health reported normal while visual flash timing deviated from standard pattern. From the harbor telemetry summary, the ferry moved away from the pier and into fog that thickened with unnatural uniformity. It did not roll in ragged sheets the way mist usually did. It formed a clean, white wall over the water, dense enough to look poured rather than weathered. From the dock, the boat's lights advanced toward that wall and then disappeared, with a suddenness that made the distance feel wrong. Not a fade, not a gradual dim, a clean cut like a curtain dropped. Vessel lights disappeared abruptly at a range where shoreline reference should have remained visible. From the dock supervisor report, Nia waited for the reappearance on the far side of the fog bank. Because the route was short and the opposite shoreline usually showed even in poor conditions, she watched the point light continue to blink the wrong rhythm, and she watched the fog hold steady as if it had boundaries. Radio contact continued for a brief window. The ferry's channel carried engine hum, the soft burst of static when the microphone moved, and the captain's voice compressed by distance. Then the signal began to degrade in a way that did not match the terrain. Under the static, a tonal alert surfaced, 3 notes evenly spaced, repeating with the calm precision of something automated. It was not the harbor light. It was not the ferry's normal equipment tone. It was closer in structure to the firehouse's 3-tone alert, but thinner, as if generated by a smaller system. 3-tone pattern detected beneath carrier noise, repeated before channel went silent. From the radio log review, Nia attempted to re-establish contact through routine steps: channel switch, power cycle, secondary handset. The lake gave her no answer. The monitoring panel continued to report that the ferry's tracker was active, showing slow forward movement into open water, then a pause that lasted longer than any mid-route stop should have. The track then did something that forced Nia to stop thinking in terms of simple visibility. The location marker shifted backward along the same line, as if the ferry had reversed course without transmitting a turn. The change was too smooth, too perfectly aligned with the outbound route, like a replay of motion rather than motion itself. GPS track displayed a return movement along outbound vector without corresponding maneuver data. From the dispatch tracking printout at the waterline, the fog remained. The harbor light continued blinking the wrong code, and the lake stayed quiet in the way it stayed quiet when it was holding sound close. The only thing that changed was the feeling in the dispatch room, the sense that the lake had stopped being a place and started being a mechanism. By the time county marine units launched at dawn, the fog had lifted enough to reveal empty water and an ordinary shoreline. Search protocol moved quickly: grid pattern, sonar pass, shoreline sweep. They looked for debris, for an oil sheen, for anything that suggested impact or capsizing. The lake offered none. No scattered equipment, no floating cushion, no broken glass. The ferry was found later that morning, secured at its original slip as if it had returned on schedule and tied itself up with care. The bow line was tensioned correctly. The stern line sat in a knot style the harbor staff recognized as the captain's habit, a practical wrap that held even in wind. No crew was aboard. The cabin was dry. The control panel was powered down. The throttle sat in neutral. The key was present but not where the captain normally kept it. A small cup sat near the helm with a ring of moisture under it, as if recently set down. The vessel was found properly moored with no crew present and no signs of forced boarding. From the marine incident report, a maintenance technician checked the harbor light immediately, expecting to find a timer failure, a loose connection, anything that would explain the wrong code. The unit tested clean. The controller logs showed normal pattern output for the entire night, as if the system believed it had flashed correctly. That contradiction became the file's core. The light's physical behavior did not match its own record. Controller log reflected standard flash sequence, while eyewitness accounts documented irregular intervals. From the maintenance cross-check, the ferry's paper logbook was opened to the correct date, the page damp at the edges from lake air. The final line had been written, but the handwriting did not match the captain's known entries. It looked practiced, almost careful. The letters formed with an even pressure that suggested someone trying to imitate a human habit without understanding the small imperfections that made it real. More unsettling was the time written beside the final note. It did not align with any clock on record, not the dock's dispatch system, not the harbor panel, not the timestamp on the nearby security camera. The written time was off by exactly 1 minute, as if it belonged to a system keeping its own schedule. Final log entry timestamp did not align with dock system records and displayed a consistent 1-minute discrepancy. From the incident documentation, Jory Vance was never recovered. The county closed the case in the language it used when water kept its secrets: presumed overboard, unrecovered remains, adverse conditions. It was the only conclusion the paperwork could hold, but locals did not accept it because the ferry had not drifted. It had returned to its slip and secured itself as if guided by something that understood docking better than it understood people. After that night, the harbor light continued to blink normally most evenings. The wrong code did not become constant. That would have made it easier because constant anomalies could be blamed on broken hardware. Instead, the wrong rhythm returned only during certain fogs, the dense white kind that looked poured across the lake. During those fogs, residents standing on the pier reported hearing a faint 3-tone signal under the wind. Not from any speaker, not from any siren, but from the air itself, as if the lake remembered the pattern and played it back quietly. It was the same 3 notes, and it came from nowhere I could point to. From a pier witness statement. The file remained unresolved, but it left the town with a new instinct. People stopped trusting visibility as proof of distance. They stopped assuming a light meant guidance. And when fog turned the water white, they stopped watching the point, because the point was still there. The code was what changed. Archival transition. The next file was found in a place that should not change at all. Paper, ink, map drawers, records that insisted a town only had the streets it could admit to. Hollis Ward ran the town archive in a converted courthouse annex where the air always felt a few degrees cooler than outside. The building had thick walls and narrow windows, and the smell of old paper lived in the corners no matter how often the floors were mopped. Hollis treated records the way some people treated family. He believed the town could forget its own past, but the documents would not. That faith lasted until the map. It was a municipal plan sheet pulled for a routine request, the kind of task Hollis could do blindfolded. A contractor needed utility easement references for a permit, and Hollis reached into a flat drawer for the standard series. District maps, revisions, overlays, the slow paper history of how a place built itself. The first sheet looked normal at a glance. Then Hollis noticed the absence. A clean rectangle had been cut out of the paper with a blade, removing an entire block. Streets vanished mid-line. Parcel boundaries ended in empty air. The excision was too precise to be an accident and too consistent to be random damage. The paper fibers at the edge were sharp, not frayed, as if the cut had been made carefully and then preserved. He pulled another plan from a different year. The same rectangle was missing. He pulled a third plan, older, with a different cartographic style and different ink. The same rectangle was missing again, in exactly the same geographic position. All examined plans showed a consistent excision in the same area across multiple decades. From Hollis's archival inventory, Note Hollis did what archivists did when something stopped making sense. He widened the sample. He moved across formats, across departments, across eras, zoning plates, fire route maps, Sanborn-style insurance diagrams, street department markups, even a faded brochure map meant for tourists. Everyone had the same blank cutout. It was as if the town's paper memory had been trained to avert its eyes. The cadastral index made it worse. The record system listed addresses within the missing rectangle. Not one or two anomalies, but a complete neighborhood's worth of entries. Lot numbers, parcels, deed transfers, tax assessments. Utility easements referenced lines that ran through the blank area, as if roads existed there to be dug up and patched. The system insisted the place existed. The maps insisted it must not be drawn. Recorded addresses corresponded to an area absent from all physical map depictions. From the municipal cross-reference memo, Hollis checked whether the excision had a human origin, the kind of coordinated vandalism that happened when people wanted secrets. He examined the cut edges under a desk lamp. There were no pencil guide marks, no torn fragments stuck to the drawer liner, no irregular wobble of a hurried hand. The blade work looked deliberate, almost practiced. He looked for the removed pieces. There were none. If someone had cut out an entire block from multiple maps, there should have been a waste trail somewhere. Scraps in a trash bin, fragments in a file folder, a rectangle of paper tucked into a book the way guilty people hid evidence. Hollis found nothing. The archive's waste logs were clean. The old shredding service invoices were routine. The absence had no byproduct. That was when Hollis began to suspect the cutouts had not been done as vandalism. They had been done as maintenance. He moved to the digital scans, hoping the older imaging might reveal something the paper no longer held. The scans showed the same empty white rectangle, not as a shadow or crease or a damage artifact, but as a flat void. There was no faint outline of removed ink, no hint of content at the edges. It looked as if the omission had existed before the scanner ever saw the page. He checked the scan metadata and access logs, expecting nothing more than the usual daytime opens by staff. Instead, he found after-hours activity clustered into a tight pattern. Map files accessed repeatedly overnight, then left untouched until morning. The timestamps aligned with a sound the town had begun to treat as routine: the siren. After-hours map file access occurred under an unassigned credential. From the information technology incident note, Hollis did not panic. He became careful. He printed the log report, placed it in a folder, and signed it the way he signed inventory sheets. He then did what he had avoided because it meant stepping into the town's oldest, least organized memory: the donation stacks and the pre-digital storage room where unprocessed materials sat in boxes. If the cutouts were policy, the earliest version might have been written down when the policy was still being explained. In a flat drawer labeled as miscellaneous drafts, Hollis found a map that did not match the municipal style. It was drawn on brittle drafting cloth with faint pencil lines and a practiced hand. The streets were sketched lightly, as if the draftsman had wanted the lines to be erasable. The missing block was present on this map, but the lines inside it were not drawn like the rest. They were thin, hesitant, and partially erased. In the margin, in small, careful letters, was an instruction Hollis could not reconcile with any normal civic note. It did not read like a survey comment. It read like a warning. It referenced sound carrying wrong within the block. It referenced lights that should not be looked at from certain angles. It referenced the idea that the street names were not stable. Found marginal note warning against entry after dark and describing abnormal sound behavior in omitted block. From Hollis's personal memo, the drafting cloth had something else too: a faint series of puncture marks near the corner, as if it had once been tacked to a wall and taken down often. People had used it. People had referred to it. People had treated it as an operational document, not a curiosity. Hollis made a copy the way he had been trained to do with fragile materials. He photographed it under even light, then wrote down the drawer location and the accession number he intended to assign. His hands shook slightly, but the action was procedural, and procedure steadied him. He brought the finding to the county clerk as required, presenting it as an archival anomaly and an information security concern. The clerk responded with polite restraint and instructed Hollis to secure the drafting cloth map and refrain from circulating the images until the office could review them. The language sounded official. The tone sounded practiced. Hollis returned to the archive and complied. He locked the drawer. He logged the action. He set the building alarm the way he always did. That night, the archive's alarm recorded a door sensor event. Open, then closed. No extended entry. No motion alarm cascade. No camera footage of a person crossing the threshold. Just a clean open and close reading that suggested a door had been used briefly and correctly. Alarm system registered a door open-close event with no corresponding motion capture. From the security report, the next morning the drafting cloth map was gone. The drawer was still locked. The lock showed no forced entry. The metal shelf inside held a fine line of paper dust, as if something had been lifted out carefully, with no hurry and no struggle. Hollis searched the storage room twice, then 3 times, then again with another staff member present, as if witnesses could force reality to behave. Nothing. Item missing with no visible breach of locked storage recorded. From the archive loss report after that, Hollis began to see the cutouts differently. They were not damage. They were a boundary maintained across time. The town's records were being kept consistent with a rule the town could not admit to without saying it out loud. A place could exist in the index, in the tax ledger, in the utility easement list, but the maps would not show the road to it. And now Hollis understood why. Maps were not just descriptions, they were permissions. Archival transition, the next file showed what it looked like when a community adapted to a rule it refused to explain. The proof was on every window. Sienna Vale arrived in Briar Junction at midday and immediately felt the town's refusal. The sun was high, the streets were visible, the storefront signs were readable, and yet the place did not behave like it was awake. There was no casual spill of interior light, no open curtains, no soft movement behind glass. The buildings looked flattened, as if the town had learned to keep its face turned away. She noticed the foil before she noticed anything else. It was everywhere. Aluminum sheets taped across windows with painter's tape and duct tape, layered in overlapping scales, crumpled into thick panels, smoothed into tight, reflective skins. Houses had foil on living room windows, but not kitchen windows. Some businesses covered every pane facing the street and left the rear glass bare. The library had foil on side windows like a deliberate blind spot. The pattern was not random, it was directional. Reflective coverings observed on a majority of street-facing windows during daylight hours. From Sienna's field observation log, Sienna had been sent for a practical reason. She worked contract inspections for municipal utilities, following recurring complaints about nighttime interference on public channels, bursts of static, odd tones on emergency band monitors, false open mic events in the dispatcher's system. It sounded like miswired equipment or someone with a high-powered hobby radio too close to public infrastructure. Her work usually ended with a citation and a fix. This town looked like it had already fixed something, not with wiring, with behavior. She stopped at a diner that should have been bright at noon. The front windows were foiled in tidy rectangles, leaving only the upper 2 inches as a narrow strip of glass. Even that strip had been smeared with something cloudy, like residue from repeated wiping. Inside, the fluorescent lighting buzzed, but it felt muffled, as if the foil had dampened not just light but the sense of being seen. The waitress took Sienna's order without making conversation and kept glancing toward the front door as if timing mattered. When Sienna asked calmly about the foil, the waitress did not laugh or roll her eyes. She answered the way someone answered a fire drill question. It was a rule. People did not look into lit rooms from outside. People did not stand on porches when an interior light switched on. People did not pull curtains open after dark just to check what was making a sound. They said it with the same cadence, as if repetition had been their safety plan. They all used the same phrasing about not looking into lit rooms from outside. From Sienna's interview notes, Sienna drove the town's main loop and marked the coverage pattern. Most foil was on street-facing panes. On side streets where houses sat closer together, there were extra layers around windows that faced other windows. She noticed many porch lights had been removed or disabled. Some houses had no bulb in the socket at all. Then she noticed what was sitting on windowsills, earplugs, not hidden away, not stored in bathrooms, not treated like a special item. They were staged in small bowls and mugs like keys. 2 pairs, 4 pairs. Some homes had a handful, as if the household expected guests. Earplugs observed staged at multiple windowsills, often paired and placed for immediate access. From the inspection note, Sienna visited the local property manager because rental units were often where illegal wiring was found. The manager, who introduced himself as Brent Lowell, did not deny the interference complaints. He said the county had been called before and the county had written notes and left. And the notes had not changed anything. He did not blame the equipment. He blamed what happened after the siren's hour. He described a recurring sequence that residents had begun calling the tap line. It started with the siren's 3-tone pattern in the distance, the same nightly time that the dispatcher logs elsewhere could not explain. A few minutes later, there would be tapping on glass, never on doors. Not frantic, not violent, patient, measured, like a code testing a boundary. Sometimes there was a sound like breathing close to the pane, close enough that someone inside could swear the glass had warmed. Those who looked, Brent said, regretted it, not because they saw a face. Most of them insisted they did not see anything clear at all. They described a sensation of attention, a feeling of being recognized, indexed, added to something. Residents reported glass tapping and breath-like sounds after the siren hour, with distress increasing after visual confirmation attempts. From the property manager's summary, Sienna asked to inspect a few units for electrical anomalies. She chose 3 houses and 1 small business, requested permission, and ran standard checks: grounding continuity, panel integrity, breaker load irregularities, any evidence of illegal transmitters or improvised signal amplifiers. She found nothing unusual. The wiring was old but compliant. The panels had dust, not tampering. The problem was not inside the walls. It was outside the windows. She reviewed the town's interference reports and found the same detail repeated in different words. A 3-tone signal being heard or detected shortly before the disturbance, always at nearly the same time. In other towns, that would have meant a malfunctioning siren or a test tone. Here, it meant something else because the people behaved like they were protecting themselves from a rule, not a noise. That evening, Sienna rented a small unit above a closed storefront. The landlord did not ask why she wanted it for one night. The landlord did not explain the foil. The foil was already installed. Sienna set up a simple recorder and left her phone on airplane mode to avoid confusing artifacts. She placed a small emergency band receiver by the window and sat in the dark with the kind of patience her job required. At the expected time, the siren sounded in the distance, climbing and holding. It was slightly warbled at the peak, like an old motor pushing through a fixed flaw. Sienna listened for any matching radio traffic and heard none. The receiver stayed quiet except for a faint undertone, a low, three-tone structure under the static that made her think of systems talking to systems. She waited. A minute later, the foil made a sound. Not a tear, not a gust. A delicate crackle like something had brushed it with fingertips. The sound did not come from the wall. It came from the glass, close and direct. Then there was tapping, slow and evenly spaced, placed at a height that suggested something standing upright on the other side. Sienna held still. She did not step closer. She did not test the foil with her own hand. She listened. Her recorder captured a quiet inhale near the window, close enough that the microphone clipped slightly, followed by a thin thread of speech-like sound. The syllables were too soft to parse into words, but the cadence resembled a dispatcher call sign, the kind of clipped identifier used at the start of official transmissions. Audio captured near-field breath and low-volume speech-like phonemes consistent with radio cadence. From Sienna's review summary, she did not pull the foil away. She understood then that the town's solution was not superstition. It was engineering by habit. If something used attention like a latch, the foil was a barrier. If something used sound like a key, the earplugs were a lock. Residents were not blocking sunlight, they were blocking access. The next morning, Sienna walked to her car and noticed that several foil sheets along the block had fresh dents pressed into them from the outside, as if someone had leaned close. The tape held. The foil had not been punctured. The dents were at about head height, repeated from window to window like a line of checks. Sienna filed her official report with nothing actionable about wiring. She wrote instead about patterns, timestamps, and community mitigation measures, using language careful enough to sound like policy rather than fear. And as she drove out of Briar Junction, she passed the town sign at the highway dip and saw that even it had been covered overnight with a reflective sheet, a welcome that refused to be read. Archival transition, the 8th file arrived on schedule, like a route that never missed its stop. The doors opened anyway. Birchline Road used to wake early. When the mills still operated, the shift change bled into the morning commute, and the school bus stop by the cracked sidewalk served 3 neighborhoods that no longer existed in the same way. After the closure, routes were consolidated, families moved, and the stop became a leftover sign no one bothered to unbolt. It stood there because removing it would have required someone to admit the town had shrunk. That was why the first report sounded like a joke told badly. A bus had arrived to pick up nobody. The first person to treat it like anything more than rumor was a volunteer crossing guard named Evelyn Marr, who still did seasonal traffic duty near the elementary school, even though the morning rush had thinned. She kept habits because habits were safer than nostalgia. She checked the town's traffic camera portal the way she checked weather radar, looking for patterns. In the footage from a camera angled down Birchline Road, she saw the bus. It rolled into frame at 4:40 in the morning, headlights on low beam, moving too slowly for a vehicle with a schedule, but too steadily for a lost driver. It aligned to the curb with practiced precision. It stopped at the exact location where children used to line up. Then it idled without visible exhaust plume, as if the engine heat had been swallowed by the fog. After a short span, the folding doors opened. No driver sat in the seat. No operator observed in driver position during door open event. From the traffic camera review, the bus stayed there long enough that the camera's timestamp advanced in clean increments. The interior lights were on, bright enough to show rows of seats and the faint shine of the aisle floor. The doors remained open as if waiting for a line of small bodies to appear out of darkness. Nothing stepped into view. When the doors closed, the bus pulled away with the same patient speed and disappeared into fog that looked too uniform to be natural. The next night, it returned at the same minute, then it returned again. Evelyn reported it to the district transportation office. expecting a quick explanation about a maintenance run or an automated startup test. The office said there were no route rehearsals scheduled, no driver training runs, no authorized bus movement at that hour. They asked her for the camera clip. They promised to look. She sent the clip and waited for them to call back with a rational answer. Instead, the district sent a single email instructing her to forward any additional footage to the county and not to share it with residents. The county treated it like possible theft at first. Deputy Harrison Lott reviewed the footage and noted what the camera could not explain. The bus did not have visible identifiers. The district nameplate area looked blank. The number panels where large digits should have been were empty, not scraped but cleanly unmarked. The license plate bracket was present, but the plate itself was missing, and the metal around it had been darkened as if repainted. The vehicle existed in the shape of a school bus without the parts that made it official. Exterior markings were incomplete or absent, including number panels and district nameplate. From the deputy's visual assessment, the third night, a resident named Jonah Kim recorded it from his second-floor window because the county asked for independent corroboration. Jonah was a night shift pharmacy tech who got home before dawn and had developed the habit of filming anything that felt like it might later be denied. His video was shaky at first, then steadied. The bus's doors opened. The interior lights washed the seats in pale yellow, and the seats were not empty in the way empty seats were supposed to be. Several seat cushions were depressed as if weight had been resting there seconds earlier. Not all of them, not random, clusters like children sitting in familiar places. The vinyl surfaces glistened, and as Jonah kept filming, he saw the impressions begin to lift slowly, as if the cushions were remembering how to be empty. The dampness remained longer than the dents. The seats looked pressed down, like someone had just gotten up. From Jonah's recorded statement, Jonah's camera also captured the aisle floor, reflecting light in a way that suggested moisture. Not puddles. A thin sheen like the residue left by wet shoes on a bus floor in winter. A few seconds after the doors opened, something else happened that made Jonah stop breathing. The bus's interior handrail, visible near the steps, swayed slightly, as if someone had just gripped it and let go. No figure appeared. No silhouette crossed the doorway. The movement was small but specific, the kind of motion caused by a hand. Jonah did not narrate over the recording. He kept silent, and that silence made the bus's idle sound stand out. The engine noise on the video was present, but oddly muffled, like it was coming through a wall rather than from a vehicle in the street. Engine tone was audible but attenuated, inconsistent with recorded proximity. From the audio review note, the county attempted an interception on the next occurrence. 2 patrol units staged on parallel roads to catch it before it reached Birchline. Their dash cameras captured fog, wet asphalt reflections, and then headlights emerging. Low, wide, familiar. For a brief span, the bus's shape filled the frame. Then the image washed out. Not like a cut, not like a malfunction, a sudden bloom of brightness, as if the camera's exposure had been forced to compensate for something too pale and too close. When the camera corrected a moment later, the road was empty. No vehicle located despite visual contact moments prior. From the pursuit addendum, the deputies checked for tire marks and found only wet pavement. No fresh tracks in the gravel shoulder, no brake scuffs. The air held a smell of warm rubber and hot metal, the kind of smell that came from brakes after a stop. But the stop itself had left no physical trace. At the bus stop, investigators found small objects arranged along the curb. They were not keys. They were name tags, the kind clipped to children's backpacks, each with a first name only, written in faded ink on laminated plastic. No surnames, no contact numbers, just first names that could belong to anyone. Caleb, Mia, Jordan, Grace. There were enough tags to suggest more than one child. All tags displayed single first names with no surnames. Tags appeared weathered yet recently placed. From the evidence log, the tags were damp, not from rain because the night had been dry. Damp as if carried in a pocket against a warm body, then set out carefully before someone stepped away. The district denied involvement again, more firmly this time. Depot inventory showed no missing vehicle. Fuel logs showed no unexplained draw. GPS trackers on active buses showed no movement. Mechanics inspected the fleet and found nothing obviously altered. The county began to suspect the footage might have been a hoax, assembled from old clips. Then the bus appeared again on a different camera angle, one that faced the stop from farther down the road and belonged to a private warehouse. 2 independent cameras captured the same arrival at 4:40, the same door open, the same empty driver's seat. The warehouse camera also captured something the town camera had not: a faint flicker in the bus's interior lights at the exact moment the doors opened, as if the system had hesitated before completing the action. Interior lighting exhibited brief fluctuation coincident with door actuation. From the secondary camera review after a week of arrivals, parents began changing routines, even though no children were supposed to be at that stop. People moved pickup times. People stopped letting teenagers walk alone to early shifts. People treated fog like an active hazard. Evelyn noticed a new pattern. On mornings after the bus arrived, the town's siren log would show nothing, as it always did, but the radio interference complaints would spike just after dawn. Residents described a faint 3-tone signal in their speakers, soft and distant, like a siren heard underwater, and some residents reported hearing something else near the stop. In the minutes after the bus left, a sound like children talking, muffled and layered, without distinct words, as if the concept of voices had been recorded and replayed without the language inside it. I heard the sound of kids, but it did not resolve into words. From a resident audio note, no one ever saw a child. No one ever saw a driver. The bus kept arriving at 4:40, opening its doors to a stop that had no passengers, performing the ritual of a route that refused to accept it had been discontinued, and in a town that was already learning that systems could activate without a logged cause, the empty bus felt like the clearest proof yet. Something was still running the old schedule. Archival transition. The 9th file returned to the source of many town rumors, the radio. This time, the interference sounded like breath on a microphone that had been removed. Redwood FM had been the kind of station people stopped noticing until it was gone. It filled empty roads with soft company, kept the night from feeling too wide, and gave the town a sense that somebody was still awake somewhere with the lights on. Overnight programming was fully automated. A playlist block, station IDs, pre-recorded sponsor reads, and a legal top-of-hour tone that never changed. The studio itself was treated like a controlled environment. Door access was keyed. The on-air booth stayed locked when no host was scheduled. Microphones were stored in a metal cabinet with a tamper seal. The reserve microphone had been removed entirely months earlier after a separate issue involving unexpected feedback, and it remained bagged, labeled, and stored off-site. That was why the first listener complaints were filed as nuisance. People called in with the same vague description, whispering under the songs, a breath sound, a soft phrase that did not match any station ID. Nothing loud enough to trip the broadcast limiter, but clear enough to make listeners lower their volume and look around their own rooms, as if the sound had followed them inside. It sounded like someone was too close to my radio. From a caller, voicemail transcription station engineer Lyle Hart was not a superstitious man. He trusted signal flow diagrams and fault trees. When the complaints reached double digits within a week, he pulled the automation logs expecting a simple cause: a corrupted audio file, a mistagged bumper, a rogue overlay in the playlist library. The logs showed clean playback, no unplanned inserts, No live inputs. He checked the board history. No microphone channels had been opened. No aux returns were active. The studio entry log showed no after-hours access. The cabinet seal was intact. Studio access remained secured. No microphone channel showed active input. From the engineering log, Lyle then did what engineers did when people insisted they heard something. He pulled the station's archived recording feed and listened with headphones. The whispering was present in the recording, embedded beneath multiple songs like a second track, riding the broadcast. It did not sound distant, it sounded near field, as if a mouth had been close enough to the microphone to leave moisture on it. Breath, then consonants. The phrases were short, clipped, and spaced as if the speaker had limited time or limited bandwidth. Most of the syllables were too soft to transcribe cleanly, but the pattern repeated across several hours, always arriving at the same point in the hour as if scheduled. It was not random bleed, it arrived like a timed insert. From Lyle's internal note, the town treated it like an urban legend for exactly one night, until the whisper began showing up in recordings made by listeners on their own devices. The station could dismiss a complaint. It could not dismiss independent copies from separate radios in separate houses. A volunteer from the local emergency committee forwarded one such recording to a county dispatcher. The dispatcher recognized something in the background that made the hair on her arms lift. A faint tonal structure beneath the whisper, almost too low to catch unless you knew what to listen for. It resembled the firehouse siren's three-tone alert, not the scream, only the opening pattern. Three-tone structure faintly present beneath program audio in multiple samples. From the County Audio Review, note, the county set up a controlled observation on the next high complaint night. A deputy named Rowan Kincaid was assigned to stand inside the locked studio with a body camera running and a portable radio tuned to the station, so the county could compare what the deputy heard in the room with what listeners heard on air. Rowan arrived before midnight. He checked the locks, photographed the intact cabinet seal, and documented the absence of any connected reserve microphone. He remained in the booth with the lights low, listening to the automation cycle through its playlist. His body camera audio captured only the quiet hum of equipment racks, the faint tick of a wall clock, and the soft, static breath of the portable radio between songs. On the station's outgoing broadcast recording, however, the whisper grew clearer. It threaded under the music bed with deliberate timing, like someone speaking into a channel that should not have existed. I could not hear it in the room, but I could see listeners describing it in real time. From Rowan's supplemental statement, at a point in the hour when the station normally played a pre-recorded ID, the whisper delivered a sequence that was clean enough to transcribe. A room number, then another, not spoken like an advertisement, spoken like someone reading from a tag rack, steady and flat, without emotion. Numeric utterances were clearly discernible in sequence. From the transcription note, the numbers matched something else already in evidence. Weeks earlier, a bag of motel keys had been recovered from the reservoir pier. Dozens of keys, clean and bright, tagged with room identifiers from the Lakeside Pines Motel, a property officially closed and listed as unstaffed. Several of those keys had been tested and found to engage their corresponding locks cleanly. The whisper on Redwood FM recited room identifiers that aligned with those same tags. Sequence appeared consistent with motel room identifiers in active evidence. From the cross-reference memo, Rowan remained in the studio during the clearest segment. He heard nothing beyond music and normal static. His portable radio did not reproduce the whisper in the room. Yet the outgoing recording captured it distinctly, riding under the broadcast as if injected downstream of the studio. That became the first detail nobody wanted to say aloud. The interference did not behave like a studio fault. It behaved like a splice into the transmission path after the point where humans could touch it. Lyle began tracing the chain in the only direction that made sense. He checked the transmitter site. The gate showed no forced entry. The building's padlock seal was unbroken. The transmitter's internal logs reported stable operation. No alarms, no faults, no power anomalies. But Lyle found something else. Tiny, repeated micro dropouts in the carrier waveform at fixed intervals. Too consistent to be weather, too patterned to be noise. The dropouts formed a cadence. 3 pulses, a pause. 3 pulses. It was the same structure that kept appearing across the town's other anomalies. The siren pattern, the fog night radio artifacts, the timed events that behaved like systems executing a schedule. Carrier interruptions displayed repeatable pulse pattern inconsistent with random interference. From the engineering analysis summary, the next night the whisper changed. It did not simply read numbers. It appeared to respond to listener behavior. Call volume spiked, and the station's phone system recorded a higher than normal rate of hang-ups, as if people dialed and then froze before speaking. On the broadcast archive, the whisper overlaid a phrase that was not a number, brief and close, like someone testing a microphone with a single line. "I can hear you listening." From a listener-submitted recording transcription, the phrase did not appear in the studio. Rowan was present again, and his body camera captured nothing beyond the normal room. The phrase existed only on the outgoing feed and on the radios in town. By dawn, Redwood FM had made a decision it had never made in decades. It cut overnight automation and went dark, replacing the schedule with dead air and a looped daytime announcement explaining maintenance interruptions. The next set of complaints did not come from people hearing a whisper. They came from people hearing silence and realizing it did not feel like relief. Because even with the station off, some residents reported a faint breath-like noise in their speakers. At the same hour, the siren sounded, as if the town's systems were still trying to talk through whatever channels remained open. It was quieter, but it was still there, like the signal was searching. From a resident statement, the official conclusion, written in careful language, attributed the event to unidentified interference and recommended hardware upgrades. The station ordered filters, replaced cabling, and scheduled a transmitter inspection. None of those steps answered the only detail that mattered to the people who had listened in the dark. A voice had reached the town through a microphone that did not exist, and it had used the station's frequency the way a hand used a hallway. When the 9 files were laid side by side, the pattern sharpened into a single uncomfortable outline. Sirens without calls, keys without staff, machines without power, words without hands, lights without rhythm, maps without access, windows covered as defense, a bus without a driver, a whisper without a microphone. Each event behaved like a system receiving input from somewhere it was not built to receive input, and each event suggested the same rule. If the town answered, the town became reachable. Final archival note. If any detail in these 9 files felt familiar, document it while you still trust your memory. Subscribe to Black Pine Archives because the next set of files will return to the same broadcast chain, the same shoreline fog, and the same hours that keep repeating, and we will follow the pattern where it leads.